Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As we are welcoming folks to the webinar, why don't you tell us who you are? There should be a little poll that has popped up on your screen. Great. We'll just leave that open as the room populates, just to get a feel for who we're talking to today. Lots of collectors in the room today. Nope. I see people are changing their votes. If you're just joining us while folks filter into the room, we're just trying to get a feel for who's on the call today. So go ahead and tell us who you are. Okay. If you haven't yet answered the quick poll, go ahead and do that as you're able. And in about 1 minute, we will end that poll and get things started. Thanks for that, Lavinia. All right. We have a good number of people in the room. If you haven't answered the poll yet, you can continue to do that for about 5 more seconds, and then I'll kick things off. All right. I'm going to close that poll. And welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about textile to textile circularity foundations. Just 1 second. And I'm Sarah Coulter, America's Program Director at Accelerating Circularity. I'm joined today by my colleague, Kirsi Roine, Senior Director of Business Operations for Europe, along with special guest Sham Sharif Sokker. Sham is a sustainability and innovation advisor with more than 17 years of experience working at the intersection of industry transformation, circular economy, and emerging technologies. Her work focuses on helping organizations translate sustainability innovation into scalable and implementable solutions. She previously served as head of innovation within one of the world's largest global fashion retailers, where she led initiatives to identify, test, and scale innovations across materials, manufacturing processes, traceability systems, and end-of-life solutions. Her work there involved collaborating with startups, research partners, and technology providers to bring new solutions into industrial implementation. As part of that, she also contributed to the development of corporate product impact measurement tools based on lifecycle assessment methodologies, supporting more informed decision-making in product development and sourcing. Earlier in her career, Sham held senior international leadership roles across Europe and Asia, including managing director of multiple brands in China and retail director across the Asia-Pacific region. Through these roles, she developed extensive experience in global retail operations, sourcing, product development, and complex supply chain systems. Today, she advises innovation programs, startups, scale-ups, and established organizations working to develop and scale solutions that support more circular, transparent, and resilient industry systems. She works across innovation ecosystems to help bridge emerging technologies with large-scale industry implementation. We're so happy to have Sham with us today from her deep lived experience navigating the gap between ambition and action. So thanks for joining us, Sham, and let's get started.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. And I think that where we start is that Sarah can go through first with who we are, and then we kick off the conversation, right?
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar with Accelerating Circularity, we are an action-oriented nonprofit focused on textile-to-textile recycling systems through a collaborative, stakeholder-led approach. And our mission is simple. It's to build circular systems that turn used textiles into new raw materials. And that's in service of our vision of a world in which textiles are no longer wasted. So to sort of get the conversation started, you know, we see a lot of ambitious goals and commitments out there, but we keep getting stuck. So why is the journey so difficult?
Yeah, maybe we start from Sham. You have been seeing this, and there is a cool new innovation coming in, and then finally there is progress, and then there is a stall. Why that typically happens? What have you seen?
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I think this is really the question, I think, in the industry. So it really applies to circularity and T2T solutions. We see and we have seen a lot of, especially in the last years, right? A lot of industry rush into setting targets and very ambitious targets. And then as time passes by, we do see like different levels of these initiatives advancing and these targets achieved, no? And we are seeing and we do see basically the ambition hitting basically the reality of the business reality and the implementation reality. And from my experience, I think that at this moment there is this realization of the gap that is really exists between the targets being set and what it takes to really make them happen and execute them. Very oftenly, these gaps are sitting in operational and financial perspective, and then, of course, very important is on the governance side of the issues. And so, at different levels, many different levels of perceived risks appear. And these perceived risks happen within internal organization, but also within the ecosystem. And they create a type of deadlock in case they are not really being addressed. And basically, if the right frameworks and mechanisms are being established to really de-risk what's been seen as disruptive or be not functioning for the business, etc. So I think this is really from what I've seen is really one of the key issues is really this gap between ambition and execution, these perceived risks, and how really the different stakeholders, whether internally or externally, can come together to de-risk and really establish this, bridge this gap, no, to make things happen.
Yeah, I think the de-risking itself, that's of course one of the factors. But you mentioned, and I'm gonna throw this to Sarah because you mentioned the operational stuff, and we have been running a lot of trials throughout the years, and I think that Sarah, we have been seeing also the same thing that. When you kind of like talk with sustainability team or let's say circularity team in a brand house, that's a totally different discussion that you have when you are then going to the supply chain, right? So Sarah, any experience on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from the very earliest days of the system trials that we ran, 4 or 5 years ago, there was such a stark difference between, like, okay, we're going to make this commitment, we're going to implement, these new materials in our products, and then we can't just like order that. It doesn't cost the same as what we've been doing, and it's not through any kind of, willful ignorance or anything like that. It's just a different way of having to do business, and an entirely new category of raw materials. We also see not just a disconnect between the brand and retail side versus the supply chain, but also even within a brand or retailer, it's the sustainability team or maybe the innovation team that's making the commitment or setting the priority. And then the people who have to actually execute on a product level are maybe brought into the conversation much later, and they don't really like their incentives are not aligned with the sustainability team's incentives, right? They're looking to meet the quality that they need to at the price that they need to with the vendors they're allowed to issue POs to. And it just doesn't quite sync up with reality.
Yeah, Sham, what does it mean when, let's say, there's a KPI set as a product level, for example, for recycled content? How that kind of like moves in an organization that it ends up to be a KPI?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. So I would say it really depends on each organization and how they are really setting their internal KPI. Sometimes it's really, I mean, top down, right? So there are like the general KPIs of a specific, let's say, organization level percentage, and then it's being scaled down to different departments, and then these departments are scaling it down to different categories and according to their, mix of fibers, volumes, and so on. And then others where this mechanism is not happening, then we see the execution of these KPIs are even much more complicated because it's not really being aligned with the general, targets of the company and then scaled down to the specific departments. But so I mean, setting the right KPIs is a key element, and really, but I think that this a really important part is because we often see, of course, like we've been saying that at least setting one the general KPI is key, and it's still key because without a general KPI, then it's much harder mission. But it doesn't stop there because coming back to what we were discussing just a few minutes ago, setting the general KPI is still not enough if there is what this disconnect that Sarah is mentioning of how do we make it happen, right? Because again, when it comes to new fibers, to T2T solutions, and in general for all these, let's say, that is be perceived as different or new and they're not the regular business as usual in this context fibers, then there is always different level of elements that have to be taken in account, and we need to be expecting it already. Of course, we don't have the full picture, but there are elements we know from the time we set the targets, and we keep discovering as the time goes by. And elements that Sarah was mentioning, of course, the quality, that's like number one. And when we say quality, we say one word, but actually it has a much, like, a lot of elements around it. From, okay, are we talking about the initial first fiber quality with these technical specs? Are we talking about the varieties of the fabric application, the percentages, the mixes, the category? So as you also, Kirsi, very well know, like there are like so much elements even behind what quality means, the price as well, and the cost that Sarah mentioned. New solutions come with the famous premium. How much is the elasticity versus this premium? What solutions can be brought in place? Supply chain, again, also this is a key. What is the integration to the supply chain strategy? How do we make it happen? Do we introduce new suppliers, existing suppliers? So this is really all these operational / financial elements that they are there, and each transition, right? And actually it's not only applying to circularity in textile, but in many other industries. The transition to something different, it always implies change and different elements to take into account and to prepare for, and to set internally and with the partners what are our criteria? What do we need? What are our red lines, and how we can work around that and set clearly, this is okay, this is not okay, and to get there, this is what we need, so that this really can come into fruition and execution, right? And I think so, yeah, this is really like I think this element is really key between, of course, the governance part, where at least we do share the same KPIs, and this is, of course, at internal level at an organization is key. Sarah is mentioning between sustainability and commercial. This is, of course, a very, very key element. And we're seeing a lot of movement even internally about what solutions, what shared models of governance to make the teams have share KPIs, share criteria, share execution and readiness plans. Otherwise, it becomes just mission impossible, right? Because it's against the decision making flow, right? The buyer normally do they're buying as usual. They have their own KPIs. And now there's this new department telling them what to do and how to do it and why, right? Why should they listen? And this is interrupting their decision making, the way they perfectly know how to make the business work, which is what's key for the business. So it's understandable. It's not that, it's not understandable, because that's what the business should do. Make sure
Mhm.
the business works, the performance works, the margins are safe. And also from sustainability, it's understandable, right? They need to make sure that the business is more sustainable, it's more circular. And so this is where these gaps exist in terms of KPIs or understanding, but this is where there should be this connection, right? In order to align and see what we can do together to make this work, no?
Yeah, and I think that from my experience, it's also about the expectations could be quite different. If you are a sustainability department, you have proven certain things to be possible. You have made probably contracts with someone that, okay, there will be a delivery in the future. But then comes the expectations of the sourcing department that there needs to be a steady flow of materials. It needs to come as ordered. It needs to come day in, day out without any disruptors. And then we are in a place where we are talking with an innovator, which is everything is still a little bit fuzzy, like how everything is going to be rolling out. That's quite a foundation to build to really try to achieve the common understanding on where we are. Sarah, when you have been working with the trials and really kind of like trying to build a common foundation, what is the kind of like the uh, most interesting things that you have been seeing? What are the biggest questions inside of these organizations that kind of like surprised you most?
I think that's a great question. And I would say that the it really is different depending on who you're talking to, right? When I'm talking to the sustainability leaders or, the innovation leaders, circularity, lead, they're really interested in, some of these sort of higher level concepts, right? Like, what's the strategy around, taking our business to the next level? And, they see us as partners and helping them build that. But when we're talking to, the fabric engineers and the sourcing team and the compliance team, they just want to know, like, what does the testing look like? What is the cost? What's the lead time? Very basic business questions that they have to ask. And the challenge is that there's still a lot of uncertainty around some of that, right? It's not that the delta between these materials and the conventional materials is maybe even that different. It's just that there's not as much information. There's not as much visibility into where these changes are coming from and if we can manage them. Um, so I think that's a big part of it. There has to be a sort of a reframing of how a team thinks about uncertainty and risk, and how do you manage that given the realities of your business.
Yeah, if we go to back to the business side and really start thinking about how the business is typically run, and then there comes a disruptor. And Sham, you were talking about transformation. What from your experience could be helping the transformation inside of the, for example, brand house to really go to a level that everybody understands the same foundations?
Yeah, I think it's very important, like what Sarah was mentioning about and also Kirsi, you were mentioning about the clarity on the expectations. And this comes really on this building the basis of the common understanding of what are we talking about, right? I mean, I think this has to be very, very clear from the very beginning and the early conversations. Because I mean, it has nothing to do when we're talking about a supplier of a T2T material that is already established, that has already thousands of tons, all the logistics and everything is already perfect, versus a supplier or a startup or a solutions provider that is still at a demo plan. I mean, these are completely different universes, right? And I think it's very important as well not to confuse them and not to confuse the business with them, because of course, like there's this element of certainty that is needed for the business. I mean, let's be real. I mean, the business needs, when they need to put a product in the market, they need to make sure that this product works because it needs to sell, that it has no durability issue, it doesn't have any color fat issue, no pilling issue. It has so these are elements of certainties that are absolutely needed for the business, right? But this is where also this setting of criteria of what is actually needed, what are the red lines, what is needed for to secure and make sure that we are fully aligned, but where are also the parts where we can still assume a part of a risk because it's also needed, right? From a sustainability perspective, from a business perspective, from an ecosystem and industry perspective. And I think there should be a full transparency and clarity and alignment within the organization and within the different stakeholders of where we stand. I mean, I think one of the biggest issues that could really not help the transformation is false promises or expectations of, yeah, this is going to work and actually it doesn't work, or as we were saying, like saying it does have the capacity and finally not being able to fulfill the capacity. So I think a very key element is creating this alignment and this clarity of what does this material stand really for today, right? How is it really at a quality perspective? What is the exactly, can it really go for 100% or it cannot? Can it have full application or it cannot? Because when the same for the price, like what is exactly the premium expected, right? But like for real, okay, with the snowball effect among the supply chain, but what is exactly the situation? What's the traceability situation? Can we trace it? Can we not trace it? So what is the timeline and the lead time? What are the sourcing origins of the material? I mean, I think because when we know the risks and when we know what's needed, then we can manage, and then there could be decisions based on that could be taken, right? And that could not put the business into any type of risk, of real risk, because the business has to continue. And so this is where this very clear criteria, very clear transparency on the real situation, and then based on that building, no, and it's a case by case, and it's really organization by organization based on the risk appetite, based on the portfolio appetite that they want to build. Then it could be managed, and of course between internal teams and then external, to really align of how are we going to work with these materials, what are we going to do in each case based on what's the status. And this is where we can still move forward, and moving forward doesn't mean moving in the same direction, right? Because in some materials we are able to put it in all the material, in all the product categories. In others, we need to still work on or more testing in whatever gap it still presents. And but this is still advancing, right? And helping and making sure we are still moving forward. So yeah, I think this alignment on the clarity on the situation, and then based on that really aligning on what's the adjusted and needed roadmaps is really key for this transformation.
Yeah, it's very important to think this from the product level, but simultaneously, one question that I would love to ask from Sarah is that um, do we even believe that organizations understand enough what circularity means? Where the kind of like the cost is coming, where the let's say all these factors are coming, where the actual product quality is coming. Doesn't they understand?
I think there really is a lot of variation in the amount of understanding, both among and between brands and retailers. So, it may be that it's a particular passion of someone in the brand, and they're, really the internal expert on this topic. Um, but, the person sitting next to them doesn't know anything about it and doesn't care. You know, they're just there to execute on their mandate, and that's also totally fair. So I think, yeah, I don't have a straightforward answer to like what is the level of knowledge, because it's so variable. And I think it's also still like I've seen a lot of progress in the last 6 years that I've been, with accelerating circularity. Um, but there's a long way to go. There's like, just, some people still really associate mechanical recycling just with, you shred it and you turn it into insulation or what have you. And, there's a lack of awareness that those fibers can even go into new yarns and fabrics for apparel. And then that's before we even get into, more advanced recycling processes, um, where, I think people just get overwhelmed. It's like, oh, chemistry, like that's a different team. Again, like I have my same basic questions. But yeah, the idea of how do we get it from, a place where we have shown that it exists into a scaled running program. Like, I think no one knows that answer yet.
Yeah, and I think that from my perspective, my knowledge and personal experience is that there is really a totally different types of organizations and totally different types of questions that we, as a recycler, you can receive, for example. If you are a recycler, you could be asked to, can you recycle our materials? That was a typical question around 5 years ago. Now I think the questions are more or less about what kind of materials can you recycle? It has been advancing, and I think that Sham, you have been in this field also so long that you have been probably seeing the change also in the leadership, right?
Yeah, of course. Like, I think that, I mean, I don't know, Kirsi, if you mean like if how much has the leadership regarding this has changed, or really the knowledge on the organization, or maybe both. But I'm happy to to speak to both.
Go ahead.
But I mean, also like happy to see if you wanna focus on one specific one.
Yeah, I think that it's very important to kind of like understand how the kind of like leadership teams in different organizations, no matter if you are a brand house or if you are a supply chain operator, uh, are there already enough knowledge about what textile circularity actually is and how that can be implemented into the collections and into the new items?
Yeah. I mean, I think there has been a lot of progress, as Sarah and Joseph has been saying. I think there's been a lot of advancement, of course, when it comes to, for example, from a very technical point of view, especially with like the different chemical technologies and what's the feedstock and what's the limitation and the colors and the mixes and so on. So there's always like still kind of there could be still some gaps, right? But still there has been a lot, and like many work actually through the industry and different organizations and internally has been done really to kind of bring a lot of knowledge to the industry of what are the solutions, what they are able to do from a feedstock perspective and from a final product perspective. And I think this is really kind of has increased a lot. So of course, like from the team's perspective, there could be still type of perhaps gaps in the sense of maybe some of the part of the knowledge is held by a specific team, and then maybe the other team is still missing part of it, right? So maybe the sustainability is more focused on the technology part, and then of course, like as Sarah was saying, the business team is really want to know, does it work? What's the quality? What's the percentage? So it's really important as well internally to really work on this knowledge sharing, right? And really to make sure who's the audience and what's really what they need to know, right? Of course, maybe the sustainability is doing all the basic due diligence from impact, from feedstock requirements, from all these more sustainability related ones, but maybe and technology and so on, maybe, but the business is more focused on something more concrete that they would apply today for their business. And so this also part of kind of translation, right, of the same sometimes information but in different wording or different focus is important to make sure that the messaging is really clear and it's easy to implement. Because also, I mean, we need to be aware that also, like in every organization, people are so busy and they have so many targets and so many things to do. So also, I mean, the knowledge that we are bringing in, the solutions that they need to implement and that need to be studied, also they need to be as clear and straight to the point as possible and as prepared as possible, right? So that also there's an optimization in terms of resources, and so that the message is clear and what they really need is clear and direct into their daily business, right? And so I think this is really important, and that's where like the workshops and trainings and really the messaging and the information sharing is really very important. Um, Same when solution providers are bringing in the information to the companies. This is also important, like how they're bringing in the information, how useful it is, how clear it is, so that it could be really as useful and efficient as possible.
So every solution provider needs to have a communication specialist, and like I try to explain this to everybody. I think that one of the kind of very interesting questions around this, and that was what I saw in the chat also, is that lots of brand houses have sustainability departments or innovation departments, but then there is a supply chain in between that we are kind of like missing in the conversation all the time, and that is inherently in totally other areas that where the brands are sitting. And if we think, for example, the supply chain in Asia, who will be educated and who will be the one that is bringing the message there to the mills and the manufacturers? Sarah, Sham, I'm opening the mics for both of you, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I loved seeing that question because it gets at such an important point, which is, sometimes we see, I mean, not even sometimes, quite often we see, so and so brand has, announced a partnership with X, innovator, and it's sort of like leaving out all of the people who have to actually take these materials into their processes and make them work. And so while the demand signal is really important to sort of get things moving, we can't just leave out the whole supply chain. And I think that that is a real challenge that we haven't overcome, this idea that one-to-one partnerships are important, but they're not going to get us there. It is a system that we're trying to build and that we're trying to change. And, so how do we connect the innovators with the mill that's going to actually turn that into fiber and yarn? And and then fabric, right? Um, because that, to Sylvie's point in the chat, the finished product producer is the one that the brand is actually going to be buying something from at the end of the day. So Sham, I'd love to hear from you, like how you've seen that work or not in your experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree, and I'm also seeing the chats and the comments about also the role of the suppliers and also the inertia in the ecosystem. I think that somebody also was mentioning. I mean, definitely. I mean, I think more and more, I think the suppliers are brought into the scene in the recent years. I think like there has been a realization, they're like being left out because of we've been saying yeah exactly this innovator or this like solution provider is like joining this brand for this for this collection or for this agreement and so on, and then what's happening in between, who's going to do that in the supply chain. And so I think in the recent years there has been and fortunately this refocus on the huge the very very important base of the textile industry, which are like the different suppliers, right? And so there has been like engagement. We've seen them increasingly in the conversations of transformation in the industry. And then of course like they've been always involved, maybe not in these bigger versions, but with the buyers, no, with the sourcing teams, with this team, there always been like this very deep connection and still conversation, because they're the ones asked to implement after all, somehow, the targets that is being set. But it's true that there is still a gap. I also think in terms of I mean, back also Kirsi to your question, who's going to train them, who's going to do that? Like there is still kind of a gap of having them more on the table, their challenges, the way they see things, how they bring a huge amount of technical knowledge and product knowledge and industry knowledge. I mean, their voice is just like so much needed in the conversation, and I think they're so important to be in the conversation. I mean, within the sustainability and the sourcing and the supply, but also across the industry conversation, because there's a lot of knowledge from them to the industry, and then of course for like these new solutions and so on to also be fully transparent and clear to them, and also of course the targets and what's needed from the brands for them and from the different to them. So I think this information sharing spaces are really clear. It's true that I mean, why we've been before seeing, okay, it's brand and flyer, because again, okay, we need the final pull, no, the demand, and that's the thing. And then we always say it's like the chicken and the egg, right? And then and the story about the suppliers waiting for the demand of the brand, and then that's why. But I think like we're seeing more and more this conversation a bit shifting, where we're trying to kind of have the roles, even suppliers really moving forward with in order as a competitive advantage or initiative to really be in this space and prepare for what's coming on. And so I think the conversation is slowly also shifting and really being more inclusive, and that's really what we need to make this move forward in terms of really this common space of shared um, knowledge, shared roadmaps, and shared risks.
Isn't it true that if we think from the kind of like a beginning of the circular chain, to collecting, sorting, pre-processing, and then recycling, that is quite straightforward. And those guys, they talk to each other. Then there's a huge gap, and then comes the brand. And we kind of like left the other part, kind of like it's just waiting there for the orders. And that has been probably something that we didn't realize 5 years ago, that how important it is. We were talking about plug and play fibers, for example, that every fiber is a plug and play fiber. That was were in every single recycled deck. And what that meant is that everybody believed that we just throw something into the supply chain and there out comes an apparel. And that doesn't happen. And even if we think about that from the kind of like a very commercial aspect, if the fiber price itself is already very high and we don't manage the supply chain, we start topping the price in every single step. And finally, the price of the actual apparel is totally out of this planet. And I think that if we think this also from the common understanding perspective, we need to understand the effectiveness in the supply chain also. Because it could be that even though it's something that suppliers are used to, is for example viscose fiber, it could go there like any other viscose fiber. But still, there's a hesitation to take a new material in. There is a scare that what if some odd chemicals are transferred through the whole chain and that is ending up to my machines. So that kind of things we need to somehow tackle in the future to really kind of like ensure that we all come from the same foundation of understanding. And this is something that we have been building on, right, at Accelerating Circularity for years now. You have been so long here, so you have a better understanding than me.
Yeah, we have seen quite a lot of progress, which is really encouraging. But still see gaps that we can maybe add value from the work that we have done. And it really does, to your earlier point, it is about sort of transparency and knowledge sharing. Um, through every node in this system, right? From the collection, from sorting, pre-processing, recycling, and also the conventional part of the supply chain through to the brands and retailers. I've been sort of with half an eye monitoring the chat, and all of the comments that folks are making are really valid. Um, the the brands, have to keep delivering, the right product to their customer, um, while also trying to implement this new way of working. And there has to be collaboration and connection between them, the suppliers, the innovators, and the raw material tier in order for that to work. But everyone needs to know sort of what the ground rules are, what the context is, what the operational readiness is of the system, which parts can scale now. Sham, you mentioned this earlier. Which pieces are ready to go and just drop it in and run with it versus where do we need more testing? Where do we need more development? Where do we need more understanding of here's the optimum application of this material? And how can we scale that? So yeah, we really need, I think, a lot of just more people in the room together, talking, learning. That's the thing that I have found at Accelerating Circularity, where we have the most success and drive the most impact is getting the people from different teams from their, organization in the same room together, looking at processes that they may not have seen before. I've heard people say, like, I never knew this is how this worked. And now everything that I've been hearing from my suppliers makes so much more sense. It really is about, I think, giving people a common ground, and a baseline of understanding so that then, we can see one another's perspective and then start working and moving in the same direction together.
Sham, if you can have a kind of like your wish to put certain people in the same room, who would you put in the same room?
Good question. Maybe first one big room and then bilateral, and then again and then
So many
so
rooms.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I think many conversations and then common understandings and criteria have to happen at different levels. No, and I think, of course, we've talked about from an internal organization perspective. No, like I think there's a lot of people who could sit more often together and put things together, especially talking about business and sustainability, because these are the core, no, and this is where, from an internal organization, things can really move forward by this understanding. But also, for example, with a solution provider, we discussed, and then, for example, with a supplier, with suppliers, I mean, even this type of bilateral meetings and conversations are also are also important to happen, right? Because then when, for example, like let's say a recycler who's he just got the chip, or sometimes even the some polymers, or or have come to, they need the next who's going to be their client, or and these conversations and these discussions also can happen. And the stronger even the solution provider or the recycler, for example, can come with some strong partners from the supply chain, the stronger the message in when they all sit in the brand, right? And then they discuss about their solution. And so I think, for example, this is a very interesting also conversation to be happening in the same room before all of them go and sit, for example, with the brands, right? Where also like sustainability and commercial are all sitting together and discussing. No, so I mean, I think that there are different types of conversations and alignment and understanding and preparation that could be happening, whether from an internal organization, but also from different key stakeholders in the ecosystem, that could be really useful to advance the agenda and align and create this alignment from different perspectives.
There's a very interesting thing in the chat. Where would we put consumers? What we should be doing with the consumers? Sarah, Sham, any ideas?
I'm gonna let Sham kick that off.
Yeah, good question. So of course, consumer is the king, right? And he's so of course, from like the consumer is has a huge power, on the whole ecosystem, and very often he's out of the conversation, of the industry conversation, because okay, like even we're saying okay, the brand is the final pull, but actually no, because the pull of the brand is the consumer, right? And so actually it all somehow also comes back also to the I mean, not all of it, but like there's a big part of role of what the consumer wants, what the consumer is weighing to pay for or not weighing to pay for, what does the consumer give in terms of values for circularity and sustainability. So the consumer and the consumer behavior and what's their demand, and then and being also like a part of the conversation is key. um, but also how to talk to the consumer and who's going to talk to the consumer. I think this is also a key question, right? And because of course the brands are always talking to the consumer, but they're trying to satisfy what the consumer wants, right? And so they're adapting to the needs. um, who should play the educational part to the consumer? um, who is it? The business? Is it our NGOs? Is it the society? Is it like how is it and this is, I think it's um yeah, it's a question that is out there, and it's not an easy one, but definitely the consumer is a key player. And the type of conversation the industry is having with the consumer is still very traditional, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of the whole conversation. Sarah, do you think that we should be talking to first to all the TikTok influencers, or how does it work?
I would say that's probably not accelerating circularity of strength, but I think, there is a role for everyone to play, and I think a really critical one for brands to play in educating their customers on, this new reality and maybe how to shift some buying patterns and what to look for in certain kinds of materials. I mean, this is a thing that brands are really good at. And, we should be playing to the strengths of every player in the system, right? Like they know how to tell stories about products. They know how to introduce innovation to their customers. So let's do that. Let's help them build those. Like I see our role really more in providing the foundation to the producers so that they can then go on and do what they do really well, which is making good products and telling the stories of those products to their customers.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you for this very insightful conversation. I'd let Sarah now to tell a little bit about what is our solution and how we could be kind of like helping the industry to change a bit. And there is still some room for questions if Ellen can pull those out. Let's do that.
Great. Thanks, Kirsi. Yeah. So this has been a really fun conversation, and it has been really fun to watch the chat and see the really salient points that attendees have made. And so we just wanted to, wrap up by putting an offering out there to you all and to your stakeholders. Um, Accelerating Circularity has been doing this work for actually a long time now. And, we've learned a lot. We've built a lot of really valuable connections in the supply chain, as well as among brands and retailers. And seeing all of the gaps and needs that we've been talking about today, um, over the last about year or so, we developed a curriculum to fill that gap. And we're really excited about it. We're really proud of it. And we are going to be hosting a 2-day session here in New York City next month. And it will go through all of the T to T content that your heart desires from, what is the system? What is the need? Um, how do these materials perform? What are the processes? Um, how do you make a T to T feedstock? What do the products at the end look like? And what are the implications from a business perspective? It's very interactive. Everyone on the Accelerating Circularity team actually did the workshop as part of sort of the wrap of building it. And it's really fun. And I even learned a lot. It's fun to hear your colleagues do some teaching. So yeah, I encourage everyone to check it out. And if it's not for you, maybe it's for someone in your network.
Thank you, Sarah. We have 7 minutes. If there's one burning question that we can answer, I think that's about it that we can take. Ellen, anything that you identified?
I think you guys got through mostly all the questions that were coming through.
I feel
Very
like I
good.
saw one that we maybe didn't touch on that I thought was really sort of a key question, and maybe the one to end all other questions. And that was, who do you think that is the change maker in the organization, the key change maker to make all of this work? Like who's really the catalyst? Is there one?
It's an amazing question. I would say that every single organization, they will have those that will be the superstars and that will be carrying these things through in an organization that will work every single day to make a world a little bit better. I think those are the change makers. But I'll let you to do yours.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I agree with Kirsi. Like, I think it's always there are in the organization different people moved by different even personal motivation. They would make things happen and push for the agendas, and that's really important. But I think also when you're like really looking for like which door to knock, I really should like depending on what like I think it's also interesting to see what is exactly what you need and then try to knock the right door. So for example, if you know that you have capacity, you are ready to implement, then maybe you do need to knock, for example, on a buying team door, right? If you are on still early startup, um, you can always knock the sourcing team, but maybe you can start also with the innovation team, right? And sometimes you need to keep knock both doors. If you have the right contacts, you can knock a higher door. So, so I think it's so yeah. I mean, I think of course every single person can play a role, and then really also identifying also what are the elements to move forward, and also try to identify a bit what door to knock.
Thanks, Sham. Sarah, tell that we have a door to knock.
We do have a door to knock. It's I think Ellen has put some links and details in the chat for everyone. But we're always happy to hear from our stakeholders, and please do get in touch with us anytime, whether it's for a formal training program or you just wanted to have a chat. We always want to hear from you.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody that's joined. It has been a pleasure. And thanks, Sham, for joining us. Thanks, Sarah, for leading us. And hope to see you soon again. And keep on messaging us. Keep on knocking our door. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Conversation.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, Shem.
Ciao.
Bye.